et vos compétences, rejoignez la communauté du Hub Meet Africa. Entrepreneur de la diaspora africaine, vous avez un projet d'affaires en Afrique? Imaginez pouvoir retrouver en quelques clics toutes les offres de services adaptées à vos besoins. Découvrez le Hub Meet Africa, la plateforme digitale d'orientation et d'information des entrepreneurs de la diaspora africaine. Vous recherchez des opportunités d'affaires, des programmes d'accompagnement technique ou financier, de l'information, des partenaires, des experts ou des consultants locaux? Conçu par et pour ses utilisateurs, le Hub Meet Africa met à votre disposition gratuitement une cartographie simplifiée des dispositifs d'appui, quel que soit l'état de maturité de votre projet, le secteur couvert, le pays visé et vos besoins d'accompagnement. Identifiez des partenaires et experts basés dans le pays de résidence ou d'installation de votre projet d'entreprise et obtenez des conseils sur mesure et des retours d'expérience pour le mener à bien. La recherche d'offres d'accompagnement n'a jamais été aussi simple. Les offres du Hub Meet Africa proposent des informations ciblées et pertinentes à tout entrepreneur de la diaspora désireux d'entreprendre en Afrique. Concrétisez vos projets business grâce aux outils collaboratifs et partagés. Positionnez votre projet grâce à l'outil d'aide à l'orientation. Accédez à des ressources efficaces et vérifiées pour comprendre le marché local et développer votre business. Entrez en relation avec les organismes d'appui à l'entrepreneuriat, les mentors, les experts, les investisseurs et tous les acteurs au service de l'entrepreneuriat de la diaspora en Afrique et en Europe. Interagissez avec les membres de la communauté à travers un post-it board et bien plus encore. Vous avez des idées et des rêves en Afrique? Vous souhaitez partager votre expertise et vos compétences? Rejoignez la communauté du Hub Meet Africa.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Good morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us to this webinar. The topic, today's topic is sharing our experience in between entrepreneurs of the diaspora in the Ivory Coast. What are the opportunities available and the tools available? I will give you some housekeeping information before we start so we can run smoothly afterwards. Let me just share my screen. Should be able to see my screen now. Sorry about that. Anyway, welcome to this webinar, to today's webinar. Before we start, some housekeeping information. First thing, this webinar is held in French, but we have English simultaneous translation. So you can follow in English if you so wish. In order to do that, you have to click on the word icon that is on the right-hand side at the bottom of your Zoom screen.
To do so, you just have to click on the little heart at the bottom of your screen.
Also, this webinar is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later on ANIMA's YouTube channel. And then for the to run this webinar smoothly, thank you very much for turning your camera and mic off when you're not speaking. Do not hesitate to raise your hand when you have something to say, because I'm telling you now, and I will repeat it throughout the webinar. We want as much as participation as we can. We have experts on entrepreneurship and development projects in Ivory Coast, so you're all invited to participate as much as possible, and to ask as many questions as you need to bring this webinar to life. So raise your hand whenever you want to take the floor, and do not hesitate to write your comments or questions in the chat box. quite rapidly. How is the webinar going to go through? I will now present Meet Africa Hub and ANIMA Investment Network, and then I leave the floor to our panelists. ANIMA, it's a platform for financial cooperation in between Middle East, Europe, and Africa. We have a network of 70 organizations, amongst this development agency, financial and economical center, research centers, innovation hubs, and incubators, and so on and so forth. This network works in order to promote the opportunities in the private sector for a shared, inclusive, and sustainable development. We try to promote investment and impact, the private sector, mobilization of skills and talents. One of our projects is Meet Africa project. This project is co-financed by the Agency for Development, French Agency for Development, and the European Union. We are implementing the project together with GIZ, and we organize this webinar and the web platform called Web Meet Africa Hub, and I will be talking about this later on. Meet Africa program is organized for entrepreneurs in Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Senegal, Tunisia. That is why we have thematic webinars. Today is Ivory Coast, is the last focus on a country that we do. You can find other previous workshops and webinars online on our YouTube channel and on our website. It is a program to support 140 entrepreneurs and a starting fund, 470 companies, a network to foster entrepreneurship from the African diaspora. And we had a forum last February called Forum for Diaspora Investors. Now, what is Meet Africa Hub? This is an orientation and information platform that is built and conceived by the stakeholders of the diaspora in order to give information to diaspora entrepreneurs. We have a tool to give information to entrepreneurs of the diaspora. A lot of information on the 6 countries I talked about previously as well, a lot of legal information and how are these countries organized. And it's also a meeting hub and a sharing hub. There are several different features, for instance, a participative agenda, a posting board where you can ask for advice or leave interesting information and discuss amongst yourselves. I'd like now to say that ANIMA will be presenting the 6th country for some collective intelligence workshop to present the new features of the hub and also to think together with entrepreneurs and institutions on how to improve this hub and how to make the most of the offers that you can find on the hub. So we will be working with all the, I invite, all the institutions to be in Ivory Coast on the 6th of June. I'd like now to introduce the panelists we have today to discuss the Ivory Coast diaspora and their opportunity. We have Jean-César LAMMERT of Business France, Guy-Fernand APPELA, if he could manage to join. He had some technical problems this morning for CIED, and Hermann KOUASSI for INCUB'IVOIR incubator. I leave now the floor to Jean-César, and I'd like to thank you three, all of you, for being with us today. Once again, to the people following online, do not hesitate to ask questions either in the chat or to raise your hand. Can I take the floor? I think you can hear me. Okay, perfect. Jean-César LAMMERT. Thank you very much, Auriane, for this introduction. I'm based in Abidjan, and I'm a director for Business France here in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. We have 10 minutes, 15 minutes to talk about Ivory Coast. I will start by presenting what we do with Business France and to give you the vision that we have of this country and the opportunity within. We are a government agency of the French government. We are based in the French embassy in Abidjan, and we support each year 350 SMEs from France in Ivory Coast. The idea is to develop leads and prospects for these companies in order for them to develop in Ivory Coast. So we work for entrepreneurs and companies based in France and that wish to start working or export in Ivory Coast, and we try to make the bridge, to make the connection in between the stakeholders here in Ivory Coast. We work in the sub-Saharan African area. 150 people here is one of the main offices here in Abidjan. The vision that we have of Ivory Coast, it's an average market basin that is developing but still is limited, but it's a market which is absolutely important in the area. It's a real regional hub. It's not a hub for sub-Saharan Africa, but for us, it is the main hub for French-speaking African countries. Many companies managed to access and to discover the opportunity of this area through Abidjan and through Ivory Coast. It is a solid and steady financial and economical growth. We are in the post-COVID period, but even during COVID, Ivory Coast was one of the few countries that continued to have a positive growth. It was, of course, limited to 2% at the time, but still a really positive outcome. The potential of Ivory Coast is really interesting today. The growth is in between 6 and 7%, and this trend will continue following all forecasts for the years to come. We are not yet at a double-figure growth, but why not in the future? But there will be some challenges and difficulties, for instance, the arrival of oil and gas in Ivory Coast, that could change the game. The second important notion and factor to take into account that makes Ivory Coast interesting is the strong French presence in Ivory Coast. Beyond the French branches of a French company can be Orange, could be Canal Plus, or Bouygues, talking about construction and companies. There are a lot of other companies in Ivory Coast. There are companies that have been here for a long time, and also French people of Ivorian origins that come back to develop a project in the country. So when you want to tap into the markets here, you will have to get in contact with this stakeholder, and these stakeholders have a strong link with France, where we are talking about French companies branches, or Ivorian people that have studied or lived in France and want to invest here in Ivory Coast. So these hundreds of thousands of SMEs are really important for you as well, for your projects. Then I'd like to share the vision that we have of the opportunities by sector. We follow up and support, as I said, 350 companies. we always talk about Ivory Coast to say that the main financial driver here is agriculture. You know that Ivory Coast is the main producer on a global standpoint of cocoa beans, but not only that, natural rubber and fruits, and the challenges are all throughout all levels. We are trying to increase yields of the crops, and then we are trying to go through a first transformation in order to improve logistics, storing of the goods, quality control in order to make products and produce more accessible for the European market. There is also a lot of focus on transformation of the agri-food industry that, as I said, has a high potential. Second point that I'd like to mention, we have a lot of projects for new infrastructure in Ivory Coast, but these are not necessarily linked to entrepreneurs. We are talking about bridges, roads, and so on and so forth. But there are a lot of solutions that can be presented and brought by entrepreneurs. The challenges are important. We can talk about access to water, to the electricity infrastructure and utilities. The government, of course, is important in that, but nevertheless, if an entrepreneur has a pertinent solution in order, for instance, let's say to reduce leaks on the water system, water utilities, that is an opportunity to develop business, of course. The government has a lot of initiatives in order to develop the electric grid, for instance, but that does not impede, let's say, the development of solar energy, wind energy, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of challenges also for mobility. You know that Abidjan is working on a project of a subway. Once again, all of these projects are steered and brought forward by the Ivorian authorities, but there is a lot of work to do, and there is a lot of opportunities for many companies in this sector. There are a lot of possible applications and needs that go around these operations. Something else that you have to keep in mind for Ivory Coast is the Can 2023 that will start in 2024 in January, February. So there again, there can be opportunity, the dissemination, a lot of opportunities around that. Other opportunities that you see for entrepreneurship are around training and education. There are a lot of challenges there. Again, people from Ivory Coast invest a lot in higher education, private training courses, and so on and so forth. There are solutions also to be developed in healthcare. There can be needs for entrepreneurs. There's a need also for financial services. Recently, I have seen that Africa represents 66% of the potential and the needs of financial tools. There are some challenges in terms of cybersecurity applied to fintech or internet. We need to protect connection and transactions. So you see a lot of possible projects, maybe to finish. As for myself, We talked about agri-food, fintech, insurance, cybersecurity. I haven't talked about mass distribution, but there are challenges for logistics and storage. But everything goes around two main technologies: smartphones or mobile phones, and application that need geolocalization, GPS service. I can talk about two examples. For instance, in meteorological forecast, there are challenges in order to avoid major climate events, especially interesting for agriculture. There are radars and systems to be implemented everywhere in order to have a control of the territory and to inform people about major climate events. And then on the geospatial part, it is important for the state in order to gather taxes, but also to tackle and to have a contact with the population through these technologies. These are key technologies throughout all sectors I talked about: education, healthcare, and agricultural development. That was all I wanted to share for the moment. Of course, I'm available for any questions you might have, and I give the floor now to my colleagues.
Thank you for that vision that overall vision you gave us of the Ivory Coast and talked about the different markets in the Ivory Coast. And as we could see, it's very interesting to learn about these different elements for innovation and technology that you mentioned. And you talked about how it's important across all the different sectors. Once again, for all of the guests, please don't hesitate to ask questions. And if not, we're going to let Guy talk now. So I think it works, and Guy is connected. So Guy, over to you. Go ahead, Guy, whenever you're ready. Okay. Thank you, Morgan. Hello, everybody. And thank you for having let our organization participate in this exchange. And it's my pleasure to give you some information about the diaspora and the work we're doing here in the Ivory Coast. My name is Guy-Fernand. I'm an entrepreneur coach here for companies. I've been working for about 20 years in coaching and assistance. And I work for the Ivory Coast Development Company. It's a non-governmental organization here in the Ivory Coast to help the diaspora developed by the European Institute of Economic Development. It's another non-governmental organization here that's been here since 1998, and it's been here for over 35 years. And it is represented in 18 countries around the world. We have three main sectors of activity. One is entrepreneurship, which is what we'll be talking about here today. But there's more than 13,000 entrepreneurs who have gone through our organization in working through Abidjan, Bouaké, Abidjan, and San Pedro. On average, we work with about 400 entrepreneurs. We help and train each year. Amongst these entrepreneurs, we've got about 60 or 70% are women and young people who are bringing about these new projects. The main sectors we see represented by these entrepreneurs are service industry, artisan and craft work, commerce, agriculture, small companies, industries, and information technology. So let's talk about the opportunities for the Ivory Coast diaspora. Based on a study done by the World Bank about the African diaspora, we're talking about 4 million people. A lot of people send money back to their family or their family members, and some want to invest it in their company. But a lot of them have difficulties either locally, difficulties due to administrative red tape, or difficulties due to trying to get financing because their projects are considered to be a risk. So what they need to know is these entrepreneurs are going to have to come into an ecosystem that they maybe don't know enough about. And plus, they have a hard time finding the right stakeholders locally in terms of suppliers, in terms of local partners, and also partners to help them develop their skills. And also partners who they can work with, reliable partners to work with locally. That's why it's necessary for you to find the institutes you need to accompany you in your projects in Africa. So I'm going to try to help you, give you a general overview of our setup here and the structure we use here in Ivory Coast. One is a more general branch we have is to accompany entrepreneurs regardless of the activity. We work very closely with the entrepreneurs and their business. A second branch we work for is much more specialized, which is in the domain of the transformation of agricultural products. And that's an incubator dedicated specifically to agribusiness entrepreneurs. We work on the project itself in terms of how to develop the product itself. We also work on the packaging. And we also work on skills development in entrepreneurship. We accompany very small companies and also medium-sized companies as well. We have customized training we can offer you to reinforce your skills of the entrepreneurs, and also individual assistance for 1 year. For companies that have high potential for development, we propose coaching from 6 to 8 months. And we are called on by companies from the private sector and also from institutions, where we can help these different entrepreneurs individually and collectively to accelerate their business. We also facilitate access to financing, in particular through partnerships that we can set up locally. We have the Dreyfus Foundation, which is just one example, which is an incubator who works for us in the agribusiness. And you may have already heard of this company, of this institution. We can find all different types of solutions for the financing you need in small and medium-sized companies. There's also a major program we're setting up now called Dédicace, which is financed by the World Bank. And that's being set up in 2 companies, in Bamako and Sempro. In these 2 companies, we'll be developing these diaspora programs with shared funds, where small and medium-sized companies can obtain a subvention, some funds to boost their activity. There's also a business plan to help you have a set business plan to help you develop your activity. And there's also the Business Accelerator Program, which helps our entrepreneurs to develop entrepreneur skills and help the company itself to develop their specific skills. So when you have an idea, we can help you realize that dream locally. Or if there's already an existing enterprise, we can help you as well. We can help you talk about if you already have a company that you want to develop locally or set up a structure here. We know that there can be difficulties when you're an entrepreneur. It's to understand the environment and the ecosystem. And when you come from outside, it can be hard to understand. Even if you are originally from Ivory Coast, you'll need assistance. You need to be accompanied, because entrepreneurs often work alone by nature. And the fact to have someone to help them doesn't just mean to give you access to the market or to skills. It's also to give you consulting help and help you to integrate an existing network and an existing community. And that's why we and our partners, we can systematically propose to our clients to be part of a larger network of entrepreneurs that'll help you with business, find business opportunities, and also to do twinning, which we do as well, and also to work on more specific areas, specific to your business, and develop your skills. Also to visit local businesses. And also we call clinics of entrepreneurs. And I really encourage you to take part, to benefit from these opportunities. I encourage all of you, even if you have a great deal of experience as entrepreneurs, because we can help you to open doors and really give you access to local markets. We can, in all different levels, we can help you to launch activities or help you to install existing activities. And also to help you set up a network of entrepreneurs who are also looking at sometimes for investors. So you have the possibility to create, we can set up an entire business, even a new business, or help you with one that already exists. We can work with entrepreneurs that we have in our listings and who have already worked with us and have been trained through our institutes. You can also find associates or partners on the local level, which can help you. That can be another way to do business here. In terms of immigrants, we also work with the French Office for Integration of Immigrants. And we've been working with them for over the last 2 years. They've put their trust in us. So working on a project, a socialization project for immigrants, with a lot of volunteers helping us here in the Ivory Coast. It's helping immigrants to develop projects and to receive some seed funds as well. If we look at some statistics, we have 52 people who have already profited from this, who have come from France, Germany, Tunisia, and Morocco. And the project we were able to install is 45 different projects we've set up. So that's 86.5% of the people who have addressed us have seen a successful project. And we see a high percentage of them are already in activity. So we see that this really works. We're talking about investments of 2,800 to 5,000 euros of sales that they've gotten afterwards. So we're talking about salvations of over about 30 million French euros, broken up into different fundings. So there's different levels in the project. First thing we do is try to discover the project. We try to understand the needs. We try to figure out how we can insert you locally. Next, we go to the second phase is to accompany you in providing you with the information about how to develop your activities in our country. It's training. And following this training, you'll have the tools and the skills you need to study the market. And based on this market study, we'll set up a business plan. Why a business plan? Because you'll need a business plan in order to defend your project. Normally, you have to defend it with the French embassy, where they're going to ask you to prove that your capabilities to do your project and complete your project at the Ivory Coast. So we're going to help you to prepare your pitch that you're going to prepare for the embassy. After we have to manage the installation, manage the promotion at the local level, manage the actual installation of your activity here, and make sure you have the tools you need to develop your skills and to get the skills you need to find the people you need for marketing, management, and all the different levels. So this is kind of an overview of how we will help entrepreneurs who want to develop it. And I can be available, of course, for any questions. Thank you for this intervention. And we see how important it is to prepare these partnerships. And we've seen this in our different webinars, and I think it's important to understand that when we arrive in a country, to find the right people we need to get our project up and running. So thank you for that. If there's no questions, and again, please don't hesitate to ask questions if you'd like. You can just get into the chat or raise your hand in the chat. I'm going to pass over to Hermann to talk to us.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Auriane, for this opportunity, and also thank to Meet Africa and ANIMA's network for this opportunity. Just to introduce myself, my name is Hermann KOUASSI. I'm a co-founder and president of INCUB'IVOIR, which is an incubator that started in 2016. So I am myself a product of the diaspora. We built this with the 2 associates that are still in France. INCUB'IVOIR specializes since 2020 on the cocoa manioca and banane plantain developments, and we work right now in order to deploy solutions around this value chain, to structure them and to be able to support entrepreneurs to create value on their territory, but also for the whole of the country. And the previous speaker talked about it in depth. Today, Côte d'Ivoire represented 28% in terms of investment on the GDP. We want to transform before 2050 all premium foodstuffs and material production. So my speech will talk about the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Ivory Coast. What you need to know is that today, for everything that is a startup, everything is really new. This ecosystem started to be developed around 2014, 2015. So we are in an environment that is developing with its advantages and its challenges, but a lot of focus to startups. And since last year, if I'm not mistaken, Ivory Coast decided to focus on SMEs and startup. For now, we have the Ivorian Startup App with a low, especially conceived and made for startup to develop, to foster their development. The Ministry of Digital Economy is working on that. In the coming days, the Ivorian Parliament will develop a decree in order to give a structure to startups in Ivory Coast. Another news, Ivory Coast has implemented the GUD, the Guichet Unique des Entreprises, so the one-stop shop for startups and companies. Two entities, missions I have. It is one of them is the supporting SMEs and startups, and we also have a guarantee fund that will be based on a structure in order to be able to develop guarantees and fund for companies that need fundraising. And for the government, that means to be able to support Ivorian companies. The state has also implemented a system in order to allow local enterprise to receive 30% of the public tenders that are posted, and also to foster cooperation with the multinational, in between the multinational and local companies and SMEs. That is what I could say about the business environment here. Now, we talk here about the role of the diaspora. The diaspora is really important in Ivory Coast, because I think since 2012, Alassane Ouattara, Ivory Coast president, has launched a messages to support this entrepreneurs of the diaspora. Today, this ministry is in the Foreign Affairs Ministry, with a general direction dedicated to all diaspora activities. And within this general management, general direction, there is a census not only of the skills and possibilities of the diaspora, but there's also a support of for entrepreneurs of the diaspora, with a lot of opportunities with financing structures, financiers, banks, in order to foster the development and carry out the projects that entrepreneurs of the diaspora have and want to implement in the Ivorian territory. All of this is getting structured right now. And Mr. LaMay talked about that, but talking about the appealing sectors, we, of course, can talk about agri-food sectors and public building and infrastructure. There are a lot of projects that are developed in these two sectors. And if I can focus today, because we specialized here in Ivory Coast with the INCUB'IVOIR in the agri-food sector, and we work today in order to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem that is interesting, that can interest foreign external financiers. So we work mainly in the fields, because today in Ivory Coast, the people working in agriculture know that our agriculture is quite primal as of today, not well developed. So we try to work in the rural area in order to raise awareness and to change their mindset from agriculture to entrepreneurship for those who have the opportunity to do it. So we carry out a workshop in order to change the mindset and to have them understand that they are stakeholders of this economy, and they can tap into a production chain. We carry out a workshop on financial management for agricultural best practices, the interest of getting together in a co-op. There is also the research of opportunity for these different stakeholders. And what's most interesting for us is how can we bridge production, transformation, and access to the market. So these are the activities that we carry out. And for the diaspora, INCUB'IVOIR has been working in partnership with Meet Africa for now 2 years, and our job is to be able to give information to these diaspora stakeholders coming from Africa, some of them from Ivory Coast, but they went to live elsewhere abroad for many years. So we try to get them up to speed to the latest developments in Ivory Coast, to have them understand how the environment here works, avoid any possible problem, loss of capital and loss of time. We try to support them in the implementation of their project, and we also give them the opportunities to have meeting rooms, offices to meet our experts. But what we try to do mainly is to create a network. The network is essential for people, entrepreneurs from the diaspora, that most of the times they have skill and they have capital, but they lack the network here. They do not know all the stakeholders. Any activity, as you might know, when you try to develop an activity in another country, that can take a lot of time and you can have several challenges. So we try to be as close as to our entrepreneurs as possible, and to inform them on opportunities and challenges, and also to tell them that in Ivory Coast things go at their pace. So you have to look at it with and you have to look at it taking the time that is necessary to develop your activity. So this is what we can do for the diaspora. I myself come from the diaspora. I know that it can be difficult with all legal procedures and or everything that you need to do to create an activity here. So I have a first-hand experience, and if I can tell something from my experience to diaspora entrepreneurs, you really needed to test the field for 1 to 2 years in order to really implement your operations. Most of the time, it requires a lot of time in order to develop a business in Africa and mainly in Ivory Coast. But if you have the when there's a will, there's a way.
Merci beaucoup, Herman,
Thank you
pour
very
cette
much,
intervention
Hermann,
super
for
intéressante.
this intervention. Really interesting. We realized that, well, you talked about on this notion of network that is really important in order to develop a project. Thank you very much to the three of you for your intervention. I'd like to invite you to give your contact and to put them in the chat if anybody wants to get in contact with you. As it is written in the chat, I'd like to invite you once more to ask questions in the chat or by raising your hand. I have some questions of my own. Something that comes again and again in the discussion is the question around fundraising and financing projects. So could you give some elements to the benefit of the people listening to us on how these funds can be found and at what stage of one's company we can start looking to raise funds? I can say something. We do not propose funding in our with our institution, but I really liked Herman's intervention when he said that you really need to choose at a given moment. So I think it is a strength of diaspora entrepreneurs to be willing to come back to the Ivory Coast to have a sustainable business and to develop solutions and to use the skills that we have acquired some of the time in France. So, of course, it is a full-time job. You cannot play on the two fields at the same time at one point. But for financial and economical development, France is stagnating as a country, is a fully mature country, whilst Africa and Ivory Coast present a lot of opportunities still. Then what we see, we do not work that much on the structuring of a project. We manage entrepreneurs that are already structured, their company are already created. But I think it is a strength having a company in France in order to be able to work in Ivory Coast, and especially for fundraising. I don't know which colleague was talking about structures that an institution that exist in order to help and support SMEs, but all of that is starting right now, and the Ivorian nation state does not have the means to support these SMEs and develop these structures. Whilst in France, we have a lot of programs for startups, incubators in order to fund R&D, and a larger offer of funds available to be invested. So it is interesting in the beginning of a project, maybe being based in France in order to have access to public funding in order to fund your R&D, for instance. You can develop or co-develop your solutions with research institutes, universities, and also funds in France and then deploy and develop it in Ivory Coast. We see it happening all the time. People from Ivory Coast or French people working on the development of a project or a product in France and then deploy it on the Ivorian market.
Thank you, Hermann. Would you like to answer his questions? Yes, I would like to respond to what he said, talking about financing. And we talk about the diaspora, it already has two cultures, and that's a big advantage. It already has the European entrepreneurial culture, and it also has the Ivory Coast culture, which of course is equally important to have. And what we know is that something we have to talk about is this ecosystem and this business environment here when you come to the Ivory Coast. It's good to come here and see how I can best structure my company here in the Ivory Coast. And that's an important point because the economic environment changes very quickly. There are financial institutions here. There are the state bank. They do finance a little bit of activities here. There are also funds that exist here. But to benefit from these funds, you have to be here locally, and you have to be able to prove that your activity and your company is going to work. And as Mr. Boissy gave you a good hint, which is you should come here and to learn about the market and see how your business would work here and see the market realities and see, there is a place here for me, and I know how to add value to my offer to get financing here so that I can actually operate here in the country. You have to know how the market works, and you have to know the needs of the market, and you have to really understand well the environment here, because there are difficulties here as there are in any markets. So once you get here on flats, you'll have to understand the different obstacles you'll have to overcome and show how you can be a good entrepreneur and prove that you will be viable here. Because talking about companies that come from Europe, people said, they said in Europe that this would work. I'd heard this and that when I was in Europe. But once you are here, you'll see how the actual market works, and you have to adapt to the reality of the market here. You have to find other strategies to make sure your project is a success. So what's important is to be available, and to be available here in the Ivory Coast to test the market and to understand the past history of the market here, coming from Europe, and see how you can use what you learned in Europe to put it to work here. You take into account the realities of Europe and the realities in the Ivory Coast, which will be different. How we consider a model entrepreneur here is obviously going to be different. Okay, thank you. Yes, Hermann? Yes, I just wanted to add something about what Guy was saying, because my point of view is, again, as someone from the diaspora myself, and some advice I would like to give with you is that when you decide to start up something here in Africa or on the Ivory Coast, I would say try for the first 2 years to not have to count on the fundings, because the market here, on the African market and on the Ivory Coast market, it's difficult to get the data you might need, the data that you can use, that you can really use for your company, that you're going to use to set up a business plan, for example. And I think Monsieur LAMMERT, Monsieur APPELA said it, oftentimes we arrive in a certain specific sector here in the Ivory Coast. We have to understand the real opportunities. We have to set up a network. And that's how it's a lot going to depend on that, if your company is going to work or not. So if you start right away with a handicap, is if you arrive and you need money or have a debts already, it's going to be very difficult for you to maybe raise money when you get here. What I would say is if you come here, in order to understand the market, you have to test it on a small scale first, see how it works, make sure that it meets up with the target market, the vision you have of the market. Because I said we're an incubator, but we're on a general level. But after we've been here for a few years, we realized that we had to change, and we had to change our position. And now we have really focused on the agribusiness, but it took us 3 years to understand that. Our initial investments were not only in agribusiness. We had our business plan when we arrived, but it didn't work. So we had to really be here in the field to test it and to learn. And I think once you understand the subject, once you have really understand the market here, then you can start to interest investors, because there are investors here. We have different structures who do want to invest in entrepreneurs. But there's a certain price tag that's going to be that you're going to have to meet. So you have to have a certain financial robustness in order to approach these companies to ask for investments. So this is things you need to know before you get here. So start on a small scale, test out your solution, see if it works, and once it works, then you can call on the debt and call on investors. Thank you, Hermann. Yes, again, coming back to that idea, you have to be out here in the field, you have to do the footwork, and also working together with different structures of assistance who will be there to help you as well. We talked about all those different organizations already. And then after a few years, maybe, you can start looking for actual financing. I saw that there was a question, or someone wanted to mention something. Would you like to develop what you said about getting help from existing companies in the Ivory Coast? Is that something someone could tell us more about? Does someone want to jump in and talk about that? Help they've received from local companies in the Ivory Coast? We'll let a few seconds to see if anybody wants to jump in. Hello, hello everybody. Thank you for this panel. It's very interesting. Yes, I wanted to say that, talk about how we can get help from local existing companies, help from local entrepreneurs who have already done market studies and who already know the reality in the field, who know all about taxes and fiscality, who know all the different administrative red tape you have to go through. Because that can help the diaspora to invest and also to save time when they do want to invest in the Ivory Coast, and also to optimize their resources. Of course, that's going to depend on the different sector in which they want to work, of course. Depends on which area the entrepreneurs want to invest, of course. But I was just wondering, I was thinking that's an important point, because if we don't really know the market that well or know the available resources, it's hard to know where we want to invest in the country if we don't know the local ecosystem. And there could be a lot of different mistakes that we could make. Yeah, I can talk about that, because there's two different comments that I wanted to talk about that. So first of all, we need to know the project that the entrepreneur has. Are they going to create their own infrastructure? Are they going to purchase an existing legal structure? In that case, they could have a partnership. That's another economic model they could look into. But I think that, I think it was Hermann or Guy who said earlier that it's true. There's two different cultures. It's good to know both cultures, Europe and Ivory Coast. But it's true that we do see that a lot of people from the diaspora might not be in step with the local market here in Ivory Coast. It changes very quickly. The context changed very quickly here in Africa and in the Ivory Coast. So it's true that you have to be careful with that. You have to know what's going on locally. As far as the business community, because I've been talking about the business community and not just the French businesses, it's very structured here, the local business community. There's a chamber of commerce, a European Chamber of Commerce, a French Chamber of Commerce, and also the French business agency here. These are big companies, big structures. There's 1,000 members of the Chamber of Commerce here. It's one of the biggest chambers of commerce, French chambers of commerce. The European Chamber has 200 members, and the other local one has 500 or 600 members. So these are pretty big, important structures, and they have all their different ways they do their networking. And these could be a good means for you to do some networking with local partners or potential local partners. So you can also exchange or get advice from these different structures to learn about how to create a structure or develop your activity here. Plus, learn about the competition. There might also be competitors here as well. It's not because you show up if the competitors are going to give you all the local information. If you're a partner, we share information. But if you're not a partner, if you're considered a competitor, then you'll get less information, obviously, to be shared with you. So keep in mind that the business community, at least the French one that I know here in the Ivory Coast, is very structured, and that's a strong point for you to use. So if you're an entrepreneur who are based in France with your structure in France, you should profit from these French structures already in place here in the Ivory Coast, which has a very strong network already in place. Okay, I was going to say, beyond questions, if there's anybody who's with us today who wants to give a testimonial about the things they've lived or gone through, about their successes or how you didn't succeed. Successes are interesting to learn about, and also failures. We can learn from what doesn't work, we can learn what does work. So both points of view are interesting. So if anyone wants to talk about that as well. If not, there's another question I want to ask. If we talk about the accompanying structures, what is the first element that people look at this when someone says at a project, they said, this entrepreneur, this project, we are going to accompany them and assist them. Or what would be the first thing that they look and say, I don't think this project's going to work. Guy, we'll take a look. For new, what's most important for an entrepreneur is someone locally in the Ivory Coast who's going to work with you on the project. Have a bridgehead over here to work with you on the project. And also important actually to have a really good project. So what's really important for us is who is going to be behind this project. And this is all the different organizations and institutions who provide financing. They want to know about who is going to be backing the project. That's who we want to know about first. Next, we're going to look at who has the skills to actually support the project. Who's behind the project? And we're going to work with whoever is behind the project and make sure they have the skills they need. If they don't, we can help them to develop their skills. We're going to develop leadership. We're going to develop self-confidence. And with them, we're going to have to develop the hard skills, which means if you launch your activity here on a small scale, you experiment on a small scale here in the Ivory Coast. With the first steps, there can be some mistakes. That's normal. We'll help you to correct them, and we'll help you to create a better structure. And then we'll move on to the launch phase. And then we'll move into a more complex structuration of the company. So we have to do modeling of the project first. We work on the project and the products they want to sell. We set up a good organization with a good business model. And then those models will work together, the structure and the business project, to make sure the business will work. So we need to develop the hard skills to make sure that they have the tools they need, to make sure that the business leader, the entrepreneur, knows how to manage their activities over 3, 4, 5 years in the initial development. And then we can move into an acceleration phase based on a system of coaching or mentorships or twinning. Show you how to get in contact with suppliers, how to get in contact with other investors to boost your activity, all the different things you need to know about financing. Once that first step has been met, where we've gone through taken our first steps, and then you can move on to the next level to boost your activity. That's how we take into account the person who is behind the project, the person who's actually going to be running the project, to make sure that they have the skills they need. Thank you, Guy. So I want to thank Jean-Claude Clamère, who is here to help us. He lives at the Coordinates of Business France. Okay, thank you for your intervention.
Oui, super intéressant, pardon, je bafouille. Oui, super, merci.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for all of this. I had a question on the setbacks and challenges. You were saying that was what is interesting. What is more interesting is the person bringing the project more than the project, because some things can be developed. Hard skills are easier to develop than soft skills. Do you see any particular challenges to develop an activity in Ivory Coast? Yes, if I can reply to that, but it goes also in the sense of the first question you asked, Auriane. Our experience today after 7 years that we've been working here, what is most important for us, the soft skill, the capacity, the skill of the entrepreneur to, on the one hand, listen and learn, and on the other hand, to be able to modify its project and maybe sacrifice some parts of what you thought in the inception of your idea. A support structure is not going to create the project in your stead. We are here just to challenge you and to help you and support you. For instance, when we support a project, we will never say to the person, this solution is not right. We will only be able to say, if you are implementing this, these are the challenges that you will face. So an entrepreneur that is not ready to think over, to go back to the drawing board on certain things and to change things, will not be able to advance. And I'd like to say that one of the main challenges and setbacks coming to invest and to develop a project in Ivory Coast is the difference that entrepreneurs see and experience in between Europe and Ivory Coast. If you're leaving Europe or France or whatever country in Europe to come in to invest in Ivory Coast, and you are thinking that things will work exactly the same way they did work in France, you are mistaken. There are a lot of differences. Things work differently in Africa. Relationships, network, presence is really important. Discussions are really important, and raising the trust of your stakeholders is an important part of your project development. Once you have understood, this, things will go better. Of course, you need to be open to other people, to frequent these networks, to be active in them, and once you will become well known in these environments, business will start to boom. There are a lot of opportunities in Ivory Coast, but network is really the most important thing. So sometimes entrepreneurs can work against themselves if they are coming here thinking that things will work exactly as they did in their previous country. Okay, thank you very much for this important insights. I will now leave the floor if anybody wants to tap in and to ask or say something. Otherwise, we will close the webinar. Hermann, if you have something that you'd like to add, something maybe we didn't discuss about, or something you would like to add to what has been said, you're free to do so. Okay, so just as a closing remark, I would say that today we really need the diaspora and their stakeholders, and we have a general management of the diaspora that works really with a cartography and in building an infrastructure. We cannot say that the work is perfect or finished, but of course we acknowledge the strength and the opportunity brought by the diaspora. What I'd like to say to stakeholders from the diaspora is do not wait for everything to be finished, to be done, because if you do that, you will tap into a market that will be fully developed and that will present less opportunities and new well-known stakeholders. There is a place for you. Here, there are a lot of opportunities. And I think for entrepreneurs of the diaspora that we have at least a double culture, and that is certainly an advantage. Beyond that, you need to keep on working, to be humble. Please be humble when you come back to Africa and understand that things do not work the same way as they do in Europe. If you are able to be that humble, you will succeed. Otherwise, you will, of course, face many challenges. But nevertheless, as I said before, there are a lot of opportunities available, and it makes sense for us to come from here in origin or to take advantage of that. Now, to continue what Hermann said, once again, I do agree there are a lot of opportunities and you need to accelerate things to foster and to bring forward your implementation here. The one-stop shop has been created rightly so in order to accelerate this. And I'd like also to underline, as my colleague just did, the importance of the network. It is important to have partners here in the territory, and also do not hesitate to contact us. We are close to these reality, to the reality of the country, and our job is to inform you on the differences you will experience from Europe to here, on how to tackle and to work with the infrastructure and the structure and the institutions here. We talked about a number of challenges, but the most important thing you need to know is that there are already people here that are used to this exercise, have a good track record, and you but have to take advantage of that and to work with us. So do not hesitate to test the market, to work with us, to ask for information, and you will see that there are a lot of opportunities and innovation in Ivory Coast, and there is certainly something for you. If you so wish, our contacts were shared on the chat box, so do not hesitate to contact us. Well, thank you very much to the both of you for what you said. It was quite enriching and interesting. I saw that somebody raised their hand. I leave you the opportunity to take the floor. If it works. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this workshop, in this webinar. We heard a lot of interesting things. Sorry, we cannot hear the speaker really well. We cannot hear you really well, Mr. Lanzani. I'd like to know if you talked about a structure that was created to manage the diaspora. I think we lost the speaker.
Ah, je crois que ça a coupé. Il a dû perdre la connexion, je pense.
Maybe a Wi-Fi or connection problem, and also we couldn't understand really well what he was asking. In the meantime, while we see if he manages to reconnect, I would like to thank our speakers, our panelists, for everything they said. Quite enriching, and I'll give you the agenda to come. Meet a network the 7th of June. There will be some collective intelligence workshop around the hub and how to improve and to give information about the support we have in each of the 6 countries. I'd like to invite all stakeholders to be there so that the hub can be really a tool that we build together that is useful and used by the institution and by entrepreneurs, men and women. Also, 3 webinars to come. On the 15th of June, there will be a webinar on tips from entrepreneurs of the diaspora on how to invest and develop in your country. First part, the second part on the 6th of July. And then the last webinar of this project will be on the 20th of July on internalization of the in Africa through the diaspora network. You will be able to find all these information and the agenda on our website, and I'd like to thank you all once again for being here, for everything that was shared today, and I'd like to say see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Merci, au revoir et à très bientôt.
Au revoir, merci beaucoup.